This is Amy Ricker, and this is my presentation for the case study of missing Booster Club funds. Just a little background information. This case study revolves around George Washington Middle School that's located in an older residential area of Warren. It serves approximately 450 students, which is a smaller sized middle school considering the area it's around. The population has been declining over the last several years with young couples moving into the bigger suburban cities, and the socioeconomic level for families has also decreased. Most of the parents work at a textile mill there in Warren. Despite the changes in the population with the and the socioeconomic levels, the community still remains very strong in their involvement in the school district. The working and the non-working parents frequently volunteer to help out, and students participate in three main activities in this district: basketball, volleyball, and track. There is also 8 cheerleaders on a cheerleading squad, and parents of these student athletes regularly volunteer to collect the proceeds at the concession stands or the gate admission and help out the principal in this district. So let's talk about Mr. Stevens, the principal. What do we know about him? He's a principal for 4 years in this district, and he is very well liked by all the people, by the students, the parents, the teachers. He works well with them in these leadership groups through PTA and different activities, and he relies very much on these parents to help out and has a good working relationship with them due to the fact he does not have an assistant principal, so they have to take on some responsibilities at these athletic events. The problem that arises for Mr. Stevens is he has reviewed the ticket sales after a big major basketball game. It's actually the last game of the season. And he and the security guard have packaged up the money. He's taken the money to the bank with the security guard, and he proceeds to count the money before he makes his deposit. And he does the concession stands, and everything comes out there, his checks and balances and profits and things. It matches his inventory. When he does the tickets, he notices there's a note from Mrs. Bowman, one of the cheerleading parents, that there are 10 tickets that had to be reported torn and destroyed, and that proceeds from the ticket sales balanced with the number of tickets minus those 10, but the total didn't reflect the amount that should have included the 10 tickets, so that beginning balance wasn't matching. And earlier in the evening, he had talked to a gentleman who had commented he had paid with a $50 bill because it had just been payday, and he notices that this $50 bill is also not in the denomination of currency that when he's counting down the bucket. So what do we need to know? We need to know who was the second person working the ticket booth that night with Mrs. Bowman. That might help have a little information of who else to talk to. Were there 2 signatures on the ticket booth count at the end of the night? Did Mrs. Bowman and whoever else was taking tickets, did they both count down and sign off on each other's, checks and balances? How did the 10 tickets get torn? Mrs. Bowman just reports that she had to destroy 10 tickets, but maybe a little bit more information of what truly went on there might help you to know if this is a true story or not. And what did Mrs. Bowman do with those 10 tickets? She just throw them away? Where's the evidence? Usually you need to keep those 10 tickets as proof and an explanation of what has happened. A little bit of information about Miss Alice Bowman, the parent. She has had 2 sons that have gone through the middle school and who are now high school students. She has a daughter, Lucy, who is a current middle school student, and she is a cheerleader. She was recognized as an all-state cheerleader and invited to march in the holiday parade in New York. Mrs. Bowman requested that the PTA fund Lucy's trip, and she created a budget and sat down with Mr. Stevens, the school principal, to request the funds, and said that the budget would approximately be for $798 that she was requesting for for flight, hotel rooms, food, and things like that. Mr. Stevens didn't feel that it was appropriate for the PTA to expend limited resources on behalf of only one student, and told Mrs. Bowman this. He even said, how would you feel if I was spending this on a different student and your child was not involved? He explained that monies raised by the PTA are to support projects for the entire students, not just one. And he was very adamant that her request was outside the parameters of that project. So what do we need to know? What are other activities where the Bowmans might be going to raise funds? Have they been trying to raise funds? Is this their first attempt to try and their only attempt to try to get money? Can payments be made in a lump, or is there a lump sum due for Lucy to go to New York? Could they be making little payments along the way, or do they owe a real fast $798? And who also worked the ticket booth with Mrs. Bowman the night the money came up missing? My proposed plan of action, first, if I was in Mr. Stevens' shoes, I would sit down with Mrs. Bowman and whoever the other second worker was that worked the ticket booth that night and explain that some monies didn't come out. The monies didn't come out to match the balances like they should have been, and kind of feel, ask them to tell me what went on. Did you guys count down the money together? Things like that. Next, I would explain that there was $50 missing, which correlates with funds that weren't accounted for on the 10 tickets that were torn, and also about knowing there was a gentleman that had came through in the discussion there. After the people are given a chance to explain what occurred that night, how funds were counted for, bookkeeping and things at the end of the night for the tickets, if it felt that the stories don't correlate, they just don't jive, you don't feel, you truly still feel that money is missing and it was a purposeful thing, then the information needs to be taken to the superintendent and the Board of Education to see if further investigation is needed into the missing funds, and if charges need to be filed and the police brought into the situation. To resolve this, based on promoting success for all students, Mr. Stevens does not take an attacking or accusing manner when he talks to Mrs. Bowman. Would be his best, just sit down and talking to her, not attacking or accusing, just saying, this is what happened, this is how I go about things, my normal procedures, I have things in place, I keep track of, my concession stand inventory, my ticket numbers, and again, talk about how you previously use your funds, how they're used and dispersed and used for groups, not individuals. I feel like when he met with her in her meeting, he was not attacking or rude about explaining how funds are used then, but maybe that needs to be a conversation again. After this, I feel like Mrs. Bowman can either try to explain more what happened and has proof to back her claim on what happened to those 10 tickets and the $50 bill that should have been in the bucket. Maybe she used it to make change for somebody that brought in a $100 bill. Maybe she, got it mixed in with her 20s. Hopefully she had somebody else working with her in the booth that can help correlate her story. If not, hopefully she'll own up to what she has done in taking the $50 and will make the restitution and make things right. In the future, then, I think Mr. Stevens will have to look into how he makes his systems of checks and balances for concessions and gate admission even harder to be mishandled. Probably need to look at Mrs. Bowman not doing it again. Maybe trying to get a faculty or a staff member or a school board member to sit in the concession stand and in the ticket booth along with parents, not just make it the responsibility of two parents, because ultimately it is administration's responsibility to keep tabs on funds and where they go and how they're spent, and to be able to keep count and explain what happens when funds come up missing. So things that I was thinking, did Mrs. Bowman really think she could get away with taking the money if she did take it? Did she use a $50 deal to pay for something else, like to give cash back to somebody? And I feel like it's very risky asking parents, even if you have the right parameters in place, to be solely responsible for things like that. I feel like there probably should be some other people responsible, some other systems in place. How I was feeling about this, I was a little irritated that Mrs. Bowman even thought that the district should pay for her child to go to New York in the very beginning. I felt that was very self-centered for her to go and ask. And if she just asked and wasn't saying, could you help pay a portion of it, or could we, and pay you back, could you help us with fundraisers? If she was just directly very adamant about the district should have to pay for her daughter, I just felt that wasn't appropriate. And I'm amazed at, even though this school is has some very obvious socioeconomic issues, that these parents step up and help out, because in today's world, I think it's difficult to get parent interaction and involvement and helping, and parents are too busy, and so I think that's great that this district can rely on those parents and have all the help they do. The things I valued was it's a very positive school environment, obviously, because Mr. Stevens gets along with all the stakeholders, his parents, his board, his other administrators, his students. Obviously, there's a lot of communication with the community if he's able to rely on the community to help him out, and there's never been any issues with them taking tickets and doing concessions and being responsible, kind of stepping up into that assistant administrative role. And I think he has good home-to-school relationships, too. I think there's just respect all the way around. So the standard that this case study covered was Standard 8. An educational leader promotes the academic success and personal well-being of every student by ensuring effective and efficient management of schools or districts to promote student, social, and academic learning. So how did we promote effective and efficient management of our school and district? I feel Mr. Stevens demonstrated understanding of operations and procedures for the proper money handling by having an inventory of his concessions, pre-numbered tickets, to try to make it more difficult for mishandling funds. He obviously has a very set routine and structure of how he does things. He has security walk him to his car, accompany him to the bank, help, oversee him counting down before he makes his deposit. So, he's got steps there to make sure that he's not the one taking the money and try to head off those, fraudulent type things. And, even though something's still, things are going to occur, even though you have things in place sometimes. Promote social learning for every student. He follows the set procedures set forward by school board policies or the state policies. So that's ensuring, that you're taking care of your school. Spending of funds is a limited group, not an individual. He was very adamant about that with Mrs. Bowman, making her known that it's not appropriate to spend those PTA funds for just her daughter, that he has to take into account the whole student body and all students in activities and where they should be. His community involvement, by having everybody involved in things, he's promoting that positive student environment, bringing in parents and keeping them informed, and his communication. He has good communication skills. He's willing to sit down and talk to people. He promotes student academic learning by building those relationships among all stakeholders, by having those positive conversations. When he talked to Mr. Dumas, when Mr. Dumas came and he was talking about it's going to be great, you're here, he can talk to any parent and he knows them. He knows what they do for a living, and he's excited to see them and makes them feel wanted and welcome. And again, he follows sets of procedures and guidelines to benefit his students and do what's best for them. And he listens to parents and communicates with them. But again, he does what's in the best interest for all students. Thank you for listening to my presentation.